On a warm, sunny afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the air was alive with the gentle chirping of birds. The streets were peaceful, with only the occasional sound of a passing car. Alex Grant, exhausted from a long day at work, was looking forward to the simplicity of being home. His golden retriever, Max, would surely be waiting by the door, tail wagging, ready to greet him with boundless enthusiasm. As Alex pulled into his driveway, the sight of his modest, welcoming house brought a small smile to his face. Its light blue exterior and a freshly mowed lawn bordered by a low wooden fence gave off a comforting charm. Sure enough, Max darted toward the door, barking happily, his tail a blur of motion. Parking his car, Alex popped the trunk to retrieve the groceries he'd picked up on the way home. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow across the car as Alex began unloading the bags, whistling a casual tune. But his peaceful moment was interrupted. "Hey, you there!" A sharp voice rang out, breaking the stillness. Alex looked up, startled, to see a woman standing across the street. She was tall, her presence stern, with short, graying hair and a demeanor that immediately suggested she was used to getting her way. Clad in a crisp beige cardigan, she stood with her hands on her hips, her gaze locked on Alex. "You're in my spot," she barked, marching closer. Her tone was sharp and accusatory, her eyes narrowing as she gestured toward his driveway. Confused, Alex raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, what?" he asked, setting the bags down gently. "This is my driveway." The woman, whose expression had hardened further, shook her head as if she hadn't heard him, or didn't want to hear him. "No, it's not," she said firmly. "You don't live here." A flicker of disbelief crossed Alex's face. "I've lived here for months," he replied evenly, determined to stay calm. "This is my home." "You must be mistaken." The woman's lips curled into a sneer. "Mistaken?" "Oh, no," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I know who lives in this neighborhood, and I know who doesn't belong." Her words were loaded, and Alex could feel the weight behind them. He blinked, stunned by her audacity. "Look, I'm not sure what you're trying to say," he said carefully, "but I have every right to be here. I live here, and I'm not in anyone's spot." The woman, her name, as Alex recalled from a previous encounter, was Linda Moore, didn't waver. Instead, her voice grew louder, her tone more confrontational. "You don't fit here," she declared. "This neighborhood has standards, and we don't need any troublemakers lowering the tone of things." By now, Max had stopped wagging his tail and was watching Linda intently, his ears perked. Alex clenched his fists, his knuckles whitening. He glanced around and noticed a few neighbors stepping out of their homes, drawn by the escalating commotion. Some lingered on their porches, others on their lawns, all looking on with curiosity and unease. "Is she serious?" one neighbor whispered to another, disbelief written on their faces. "I can't believe this is happening," another murmured, shaking their head. Alex took a deep breath, willing himself to remain calm. "Linda, this is my property," he said firmly, his voice steady. "I don't want any trouble, but you're the one causing a scene here." Linda's face flushed red with anger. "Trouble? You think I'm the trouble?" she shot back, her voice nearly a shout now. "You're ruining this neighborhood. People like you just bring problems." The crowd of onlookers grew, whispers spreading among them like wildfire. Some seemed uncomfortable, while others looked visibly angry at Linda's words. Alex stood his ground, his heart racing, but he refused to let her hateful remarks provoke him into reacting in a way that would only fuel her vitriol. "Listen," he said, his voice resolute. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my home, and I have every right to be here. Whatever your problem is, it's not with me. It's with yourself." Linda's glare didn't soften, but the murmurs of the crowd grew louder, and it was clear that some of the neighbors were no longer on her side. One man, standing near the edge of his lawn, finally spoke up. "Linda, that's enough," he said, stepping forward. "We've all seen Alex here. He's a good guy. This isn't right." Others nodded in agreement, and Linda's confidence seemed to waver for a brief moment. But her stubbornness won out. She spun on her heel, muttering something under her breath as she stormed back toward her house. The tension in the air lingered as Alex stood in his driveway, trying to process what had just happened. Max nudged his leg, sensing his owner's distress. Alex knelt down, running a hand through the dog's fur, grateful for the small comfort. The neighbors began to disperse, though a few offered him supportive nods or quiet words of encouragement as they passed. The incident had cast a shadow over what should have been a simple, peaceful afternoon. But as Alex stood, watching the sunset reflect off his home's windows, he made a silent vow. He wasn't going to let Linda's prejudice define his place in this neighborhood. This was his home, and he intended to stay no matter what. Taking a steady breath, Alex clenched his jaw, refusing to let the situation spiral. His heart pounded, hands trembling slightly, but he knew he had to stay composed. He couldn't give Linda the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. "Ma'am," Alex said firmly, his voice steady. "This is my driveway. I live here. I'm not going anywhere." But Linda wouldn't back down. She stepped closer, jabbing her finger toward him as her voice rose. "You need to move your car right now," she barked. "I'm not dealing with this nonsense. People like you have no respect for neighborhoods like this." Alex felt frustration bubbling but reminded himself that arguing wouldn't change anything. Her words were laced with prejudice, and no explanation would satisfy her. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, ready to document what was happening. As soon as Linda saw the phone, her tone shifted. Her eyes widened, and she stepped back defensively.
"What are you doing?" she snapped.
"You can't record me."
"Turn that off."
Alex kept the phone steady, calmly recording as she continued her tirade. This wasn't just about a rude neighbor anymore. This was about exposing her hateful behavior. He was determined to stand his ground. The gathering neighbors watched, their faces a mix of shock and unease. Some peeked out from curtains, while others stood silently on their lawns. Alex caught snippets of their murmurs. "She's out of line," someone muttered. "This has gone too far," another said quietly. Linda's voice grew louder, but her words began to lose weight as the neighbors' silent disapproval became apparent. Alex held his ground, his resolve unshaken. The sound of approaching sirens broke through the tension. A patrol car pulled up, and two officers stepped out, their faces serious. Linda wasted no time rushing toward them, her voice frantic. "Officer," she cried, pointing at Alex. "That man is harassing me. He's blocking my driveway, and he doesn't even live here." Alex didn't flinch. His phone still recording, he stood calmly, knowing the truth was on his side. Before the officers could respond, a neighbor stepped forward. Lisa, a soft-spoken woman known for her fairness, addressed them. "Officer, I've seen everything. Alex lives here. That's his driveway." Linda has been shouting at him and making hateful remarks. This isn't the first time. Linda's face twisted in anger, but Lisa pressed on. "She's always causing trouble, and we've had enough," Lisa said, glancing at the officers. Other neighbors nodded, their murmurs of agreement rippling through the crowd. Linda hesitated, her confidence faltering for the first time. Her accusations began unraveling under the collective weight of the truth. One of the officers finally spoke. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Linda, "it's clear there's been a misunderstanding. You have no right to harass your neighbor. I suggest you drop this matter." Linda opened her mouth to argue, but fell silent as the neighbor's stares bore into her. With a flush of anger and humiliation, she turned and stormed back to her house, muttering under her breath. The officers approached Alex. Lisa added, "He's been recording everything. If you need proof, he has it." Alex handed over his phone, his face calm. "I just want to live in peace," he said simply. "This is my home." After reviewing the footage, the officers nodded and returned the phone. "Thanks for your cooperation," one said before heading back to their car. As the crowd dispersed, Lisa approached Alex with a kind smile. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that," she said. "If you ever need anything, I'm here." Alex nodded, his voice steady. "Thank you. It means a lot." Though the tension lingered, Alex glanced at the neighbors who had quietly supported him and felt a sense of relief. This was his home, and he wasn't alone.